strong supporters, which I really like. And the thing that intrigued me about this was actually the Decidueye line, as it instead of just being, super linear, hit hard with Raichu, he actually has a bit of an alternate strategy if he needs to with Flying Flip and with Decidueye GX. So if he runs into an opponent where the Nuzzle isn't, the powerful Spark isn't quite enough, then he's got alternate strategies to fall back on. The only downside, I think, of this deck is the Pokemon search itself. It's a little light, which can be pretty bad if, since the main goal of a Pachirisu Nuzzle deck is to flood your board with Nuzzle Pokemon and find the Pachirisu. So I could see it having some inconsistency struggles in that regard, but it's also the sort of deck where if it gets going, I think it could just roll over people if he has, a good start. So I think this deck is really neat, and that's why it's my honorable mention.
All right, fair enough. So then moving on to Best Pal Al.
All right, so I chose Lewis's Malamar spread deck for my honorable mention. The basic strategy of this deck is consistently attaching Psychic Energy from your discard pile to your benched Pokemon, and that lets him go for this toolboxy strategy, where he's got a ton of basic attackers that attack either for Psychic Energy or Colorless Energy. So from the look of the deck list, the main plan is to go in with the Tapu Koko promo with the Flying Flip, spreading 20 to your entire opponent's board. And then he's also got that Lowland Sandslash GX. So later in the game, he can use the GX attack on there to do 100 to all of his opponent's Pokemon. So that's a really strong finisher. The only reason I don't have it higher is it has a lack of hand disruption. So there's no way he can interact with his opponent's hand, so his opponent can sort of keep building up, which is quite an important issue in high power, I think. He's also got the Scoop Up block Mr. Mime, which I'm a big fan of. Can combo that with the spread and the spell tags to prevent people from using Scoop Up nets and Acerola. I know looping Acerola is quite a powerful strategy in this cube, so he's got that as a countermeasure. So, yeah, those are the main reasons why he's my honorable mention and not in my top 5. So, yeah, moving on to.
I think I'm up next. So my number 5 pick, as soon as it comes up on the screen, is. Or my honorable mention, actually, is Beastbox, and the list should be up on the screen in just a minute here. There it is. So my honorable mention is Beastbox. It is built by Blue, and I really like what this deck is doing. It has a lot of fantastic synergies with all of his Beast stuff. He's got the Beast Ring, and a ton of search, just like an insanely heavy search count. It's really, really nice, and he should be able to set up pretty reliably every single game. That said, I know he took a loss early on, and I think that maybe some of the decks that are really streamlined, really aggressive, and have a very focused strategy might be able to kind of get over the top of this Beastbox strategy. The versatility in and of itself is not an asset so much. Just because he can do a lot of stuff doesn't mean it makes it better. But I am definitely looking at this deck for a really strong contender moving forward. It just has tons of options. It's really aggressive and fast and good consistency all around. So, but moving on to the next in line, we have Mike.
All right. So for my pick here for honorable mentions, I have Best Pal Alice Como deck. Now, I think this deck, the Comos are really good. I think the Warcry one isn't too good, but it's only a one-off. But the 3 Steely Uppercut ones are pretty good, doing 180 if you have a tool card attached and you discard it. And that's really good damage in this cube. And almost any cube, that's really good damage. And with the Coco Prism, he can power it up. Like he can streamline the deck better. And the 3 Mirror Circuitry is also like a really solid attacker mid game if you're Like, it's good to use 120 in a basic. It's like really good. So yeah, I picked this deck mainly because like it's really hard. Como is a cool deck. I like Como in this cube a lot. Has the 2 Altaria, so it can like one shot a Raichu GX if it needs to. And yeah, Lance is really good. And the biggest pitfall that makes it not go in my top 5 is the clunkiness aspect of it. I think this deck could have some games where its just hands are unplayable and it just loses due to it. But if this deck is up and running, I think it could do really good, and I think it can make top 8 or further. And then, yeah, that's all I have to say. And now we move into Grover's pick.
Thanks, Mike. So my pick is going to be Decidueye. If for anyone who watched the stream of the draft, which is on our YouTube channel at P3 Podcast, we actually ended up seeing Weiss on Ice getting into all of the Decidueye GXs super early, which allowed him to prioritize a lot of other cards like Rare Candy. So I was very happy to see him put this deck together. I think Decidueye has a lot to offer in this cube. The Feather Arrow ability, I'm sure many are familiar with, who are familiar with this era, is strong in its own right, and then pairing it with cards like Lurantis, especially the promo that gives you extra damage. A few other tech cards like the Pheromosa, the Bulu, and the Golisopod all allow you to deal with threats that your opponent is trying to throw at you. You also have a copy of the Deep Forest Camo, which is the more recent Decidueye that was printed, that is going to be effective against any decks that are centric around GXs, and the Splitting Arrow itself, especially with the additional damage of Lurantis, can also be very threatening because you're doing 90 plus up to 40 more, which can be really good against one prizer decks, as well as the extra 20 on both can set up more knockouts for, say, the Bulu or the Pheromosa or even the Lurantis GX. He also has a copy of the Struggle GX. I'm interested to see what happens with that card if he's able to get around maybe decks like Empoleon that are committed to playing a 1 or 2 energies, because the Struggle can't get inflicted by damage from Pokemon with less than 2 or less energies attached. So we haven't really seen that card come out yet. I'm really interested to see what happens there. I like that he has a fair amount of supporters here. He's got a lot of copies of N, Cynthia, and like Instant Draw. The only thing that's lacking in this deck, I think, is a lot of the search cards, because he only has up to, I think, 6 or 5 search cards in total with the Ultra Ball, Nest Ball, Net Ball, and 2 communications. I think that's kind of a hindrance when you're playing a heavy Stage 2 deck. Although he does have 4 copies of Rare Candy, which is great for being aggressive, but if he can't get into the Pokemon, that'd be kind of a struggle. He is 1/1 though, so I think there's a lot of potential for this deck. I'm obviously a huge Decidueye fan, so maybe I'm a little bit biased here, but I thought it definitely deserved an honorable mention, and I would be excited to see how this deck does moving forward. So with that all said, let's recap here. We have Zach with the Raichu Decidueye deck, Best Pal Out with the Malay Spread, Slight with the Beast Box, the Mike with Como, and myself with Decidueye. Fellows, opening the floor. Any comments, any questions you want to ask the fellow commentators? Floor is open.
I am interested to see how many of these Malamar Blaziken spread decks that we see people rate on their list, because there were a lot of them actually. There are 3 Malamar and 1 Blaziken version. I think they all play to a very similar game plan, so really excited to see where people put those on their list, because I definitely have some strong opinions on them. Maybe not too strong opinions, but it seems like the general consensus on them is pretty split. What would you guys say? So I know Al, you put Malamar Spread as your honorable mention. What do you like about it particularly?
I just think it gives the deck another win condition. So often you play Malamar where you're just powering up, traditionally the same attacker with the Giratina Lost Thunder, but in this cube, he's got the Necrozma or the Deoxys. So he can swing good numbers to the active each turn, but sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you struggle against these other decks. Perhaps you can set up more efficient attackers. For example, a Lowland Eggs, they have 1 energy, they can do 120 for that and knock out your attackers. Perhaps you need another strategy where you win through actually wiping out multiple Pokemon in 1 turn. So I think having that option makes the deck better, which is why this is my highest rated Malamar deck.
Gotcha. Just interested to hear. Mike, I know you're playing one. Just really, does anybody else have any thoughts on that particular archetype? I don't want to spoil anything. I don't know what everybody's lists are. So if I'm jumping the gun, then definitely feel free to not answer. But just curious to hear what you guys think about it, because there's been a lot of discussion in the group for sure.
Yeah, it's a pretty decent strategy. I didn't think too many people thought of it going into it, but it's the best way to use a lone Sandslash, I think, in this cube. And I have it one of them in my top 5, so I'll talk more about it then. But yeah, I think it's a decent archetype.
Sounds good. That's all I've got, though. Andrew, if you'd like to move us along, then unless anybody else has anything they'd like to say.
I will say that Slight, you were getting called out in the chat by It's Victor saying I'm ready to wreck Slight with Spiky Storm. Any response to that?
Okay, so I have played a lot against the Spiky Storm decks, actually. I tested, very significantly against them. Against Vic's deck specifically, I don't think it's a good matchup anyway, because he's playing 3 of the non-EX Blaziken, and that's a little bit tough for me. But I just think that the strategy... So, I guess to elaborate on my position, I think the strategy is kind of flimsy, especially if people can see your deck list in advance, and once they kind of know what's coming and learn how to play against it. So, especially against some of the players who are able to recognize or don't have to bench heavily into it, it's really easy to circumvent huge Sandslash turns, and then the decks are just not quite as good as some of the more focused ones in the event. So I'm definitely not sold on the deck. I could see it doing very well, but its matchups are really slanted, and you could definitely hit a bad run and just kind of get walked over.
All right, so Vic, you're gonna have to prove him wrong throughout the league. NinjaRin34 asks a good question. Is this going up on YouTube? Yes, it will be up on YouTube probably the day after this stream. So expect tomorrow for it to be up. So then I guess we will move forward. So then starting with Zach, do you want to go into your number 5 pick?
All right, so my number 5 pick is Blue Cheesecake's Lurantis Selazzlejx. I know there's more than one of these decks in the cube. I think they're all pretty good, just because I think this archetype is pretty powerful, but this is the one I thought was the best. He's got a great consistency base. He's got, I believe it's 7 different Pokemon search items out, plus a Professor Oak setup. Which is very good because then not only can he add that to a pretty strong base of supporters, but since he has the Roast Reveal Salazzle, he can set that up very quickly to just start really going through his deck. And then that, again, combos really well with Lurantis GX's Flower Supply because then you're just naturally discarding the energy so you can recover them. As far as aggressive decks that go, I think this is one of the better ones. He's got 2 of the... Lurantis that power up and increase damage on Grass and Fire, which is really good for Grass and Fire. But that means Lurantis GX Flower Supply, that can hit 1 for 80 damage while accelerating, which is pretty good. And then once you get to the second attack, which you can do theoretically very quickly, then he can start taking some one-hit KOs and just, start steamrolling the opponents from there. The other thing I like about this deck is it's got Welder for more acceleration for, say, the Entei and the Selazzlejx out of nowhere. But then he also has a bit of a defensive strategy going on with Choice Helmet and Acerola. Acerola, I think, is a very strong card in this cube, especially going against a lot of 2-hit KO decks. So being able to do that, prevent some damage, heal damage, and then with the attack itself, and then bounce back and start doing it again, that's going to be really good. And then as a finisher, he has Selazzlejx, which is one of the strongest attackers in the cube. Trying to play around that late game, especially once, you've gotten 4 prizes and it's hitting 2 for 200, it's very difficult. So as far as aggressive decks, I think this is one of the better ones in the cube. My only complaint about it is that it doesn't have any Pokemon recovery. I would have loved to have seen a way to be able to reuse the Entei or reuse Selazzlejx if you need to. But other than that, I think it's a really solid list. And that's all I have on that. So next up is Al.
All right, so for my number 5 pick, I've chosen Chimerex or Chimerex's Electro Dark Box decks or Boom Dark Box. So he's using the Weavile GX, which allows him to move Dark Energies between his Pokemon as often as he likes between his turn. And the Electro GX, you can knock it out, your opponent takes 2 prize cards, and accelerate 5 energy from your discard pile to your non-GX Pokemon, I believe. But using the Weavile GX, he can actually move those energies onto some of his GX Pokemon. So the most important one, I think, is the Guzzlord GX. He has a 5 energy GX attack, Glutton GX, which does 100 damage. And if that takes a knockout, you actually take 2 additional prize cards. So he can get that online very quickly. Another reason I like this deck is he has the Sledgehammer Buzzwole as an early attacker. He can potentially, on the second turn, explode the Electrode, and then his opponent's at 4 prize cards, and he can start swinging 120 damage with that Sledgehammer from turn 2, which is an insane amount of pressure to put on your opponent. He's got some good hand disruption cards when behind, such as Ace Trainer. He can explode the Electrode, Ace Trainer. His opponent now only has 3 cards in hand. Same with N, and then he's also got the Counter Catcher for when he's behind on prize cards. Another good thing about this deck, which is why I like it, is he's got an Acerola and a Scoop Up Net. So he can move the energy off his Pokemon with the Weavile GX and keep them in play. And then he can Acerola or Scoop Up Net his Pokemon, and then put the Pokemon straight back down, and then just move the energy back onto it again, effectively fully healing it. And he's just got a really streamlined Ball Search. So he's got 4 Ultra Ball, which is really important for getting those energies in the discard pile early for the Electro GX, and 2 Viridian Forest. So he shouldn't have any trouble getting energy in his discard pile to actually explode his Electrode. So altogether, I think it's a very well put together deck. He's got recovery, he's got a good supporter line, good Ball Search, and a good central strategy. You're just working from 2 prizes behind because you're giving them 2 prizes with Electrode, but I think he's done a good job with this one. So that's why he's my number 5. So let's move on to Slight.
All right, so moving up to my number 5 pick here, I also have a Dark Box, but I have Sebastian instead. I really like Sebastian's deck for a lot of the reasons that Al talked about liking Chimerax's deck, so I'm not going to go too much into this, but I just really like the toolkit he's got. We see the Darkrai Prism Star, Oblivion Wing Eviltal. I really like the inclusion of the Oricorio because hitting an energy every single turn on these dark decks is really critical, so the Oricorio can make that very easy to do. It also lets him set up his discards really well with Triple Ultra Ball, with Quick Ball, things like that, so he can turn his Electrode live very easily. The things that I don't love here, pretty much the only thing that I don't love here is he's only got 2 stadiums, so he could have a really hard time with cards like Power Plant and Shrine of Punishment. And those cards are cards that we see in a lot of decks in this event. So staying on top of that stadium game, he's going to have to just play extremely carefully, and I think that he could definitely stumble if he gets hit with like a Reset Stamp or an N combined with a Power Plant. I think that could be pretty devastating for the deck in general, and his opportunities to work out of that are pretty limited, unlike in Chimerax's deck, which has like 4 stadiums to counter it. So just something to note there. But that is all I've got, and I will pass it over to Mike.
All right, so for my number 5 pick, I had Vic, the deck we were just talking about there in between the rounds here. And there's about 5 different decks that I was considering for 5th, and I chose this one because I think it's about as good as all the other ones, but I really like its strategy. Going with the Coco into Sandslash, and Blaziken also has a spreading attack on it. Does 20 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon and 90 to the active, which is really good with the counter catcher strategy. And he has a lot of stuff that goes into that. This deck is very matchup reliant. If he hits bad matchups, this could do really bad. If he hits good matchups, this could win the event. Yeah, with he has like so many things to help support the strategy. The biggest problem with it is matchups and counterplay. Some players are better at playing around this than others, depending on like deck or skill. But yeah, the deck will do its thing almost every game. But can it beat the good decks is like the biggest question. But I think it's good enough for number 5. And yeah, that's my reasoning. And let's go over to Grover.
Yeah, thanks. So my number 5, and I had a hard time picking all of my top 5 just because there's so many good decks in this cube. I think that's attributed to like the skill cap that's just been increasing every season, it seems. But my number 5 is JL's Empoleon Macargo deck. I think this deck's really strong. I'm a huge fan of just Macargo in general with a smooth over ability, letting you put any card on top of your deck. And that just synergizes really well with the Oranguru as well as the dive draw, which is just discard draw. And what I love about Macargo is that it basically gives him access to his entire deck as long as whenever he sets it up. So I feel very good about his list. I really like a lot of things that are going on here. The total command Empoleon does 20 for each bench Pokemon on your side as well as your opponent. So it does have like a cap of about 200, which on a 1 prize Pokemon for 2 energies can be really good. Granted, you do have to play around it. So it isn't always going to be 200, but you are putting pressure on your opponent just by the fact that they have to play around that situation. With cards like Dedenne and Lele, which are given to everybody at the beginning, a lot of decks are kind of built around using them, so that's why people generally play Bridget or they play ways to get out the Dene. So it's not always easy. So I feel like he's going to be able to at least be able to play into that, as well as he does have the Recall Empoleon, which why that's significant is that the Piplup for 3 energies, but when you use Recall, it's only 1, does 100 to the bench. So what he has here is he has a deck that's going to pressure your opponent to not bench Pokemon, but he also has really efficient 1 energy Snipe, which can be great for setting out knockouts on bigger Pokemon, which it also can knock out Pokemons like Macargo, like any other draw types that exist, any evolving stage 1s or evolving basics he's going to be able to pressure, outside of like maybe Silvally and those kind of things who have more bigger basics, but it's a lot to put up with. That's it. He has a lot of search also. He has the really fleshed out array of cards to be able to find the Pokemon he needs. And once he gets the Macargo out, I think he's pretty much set up to then just get into the rest of his like rare candies, Prinplups, and Empoleon. So he is kind of lacking in supporters, but he does have a lot of good ones. Kikui is really good for fixing the damage cap. The Acerola is really nice, especially prize denial and a 6 prize deck is really good just because you're forcing your opponent to take another prize essentially. So especially in those bigger Pokemon like the GXs have to now deal with these Empoleons having to be able to heal, and they have really efficient attack costs, so it's not gonna be hard for him to set up those attacks. The other reason I didn't put it at my number 1 is because Empoleon has traditionally been testing fairly weak in comparison to the other decks in my top 5. So I am not confident in necessarily its ability, but I'm interested to see what is going to happen. I think this is definitely a very explosive, very good deck. So I have total faith this deck could actually go all the way, but I want to be able to see it. So I put it at number 5, sort of a safety, but I could see it being put much higher. With that all said, recapping our top 5, we had Zach with Blue Cheesecakes, Lawrence Selazzlejx, Best Palaus, number 5 with Boom Dark Box by Chimerex, Slights, Silvally Dark Box by Sebastian, Mike's with Blaziken, Vic, and then of course, so I just said, Empoleon Macargo by JL. So once again, floor is open for discussion if anyone has anything to say.
I guess I'll say one thing I would like to say there is I know someone brought up Slate brought up the issue of power plants and people having stadiums to counter around it. I think one caveat to that, like to expand on that more specifically, is that disruption seems to be very strong in this cube. And so I think the decks that have a strong disruption strategy are probably likely to do better. One thing I forgot to mention when talking about Blue Cheesecake's deck is he does have, the Power Plant N combo. In JL's deck you were just talking about, he has the Power Plant Reset Stamp combo. So that sort of stuff is really strong. And I think a lot of these lists that are up here are probably going to have something, either they can do it themselves or they're going to have a way to counteract that via playing more stadiums or just having a lot of good consistency.
Yeah, I completely agree with the decks having disruptive elements being really scary in this event, and decks that are resistant to them are so much stronger in just the general spread of matchups. I'm a huge fan of the decks with totally non-GX draw and search. So the Magcargo with either Oranguru or Empoleon, and the Selazzlejx with Roast Reveal, just cards that can allow you to recover from low ends no matter what your opponent does, really effectively. I think those strategies are so powerful in this cube. So definitely something that I'm going to be taking a look at as well.
So I did want to ask, well, I see two Darkbox on the screen, and Al or Slight, feel free to chime in, but that was recently added to the cube upon like some of the later testings. How do you think it fares within the meta? Do you think it was a good addition? Do you think it needs anything else, or like from like a cube perspective, or is this something we need to wait and see how this pans out?
I think it's a hard call. It has a lot of strengths for sure, but it also has a lot of weaknesses. A lot of your heavy hitters are fighting weak. You know, there are some fighting resistant ones like some of the evil talls, but they're definitely not the cornerstones of your deck. The power plant kind of strategies are really strong against you. There's pretty much no way for you to move your energy without using a GX. And anything that can one-shot like a Guzzlord or something before, or kind of preempt a Guzzlord and prevent it from coming down and taking a bunch of prizes, is going to give it a hard time. So that can definitely be something tricky for the deck. But on the flip side, Guzzlord GX's GX attack is insane. So it's going to be really tough to argue with taking 2 additional prizes on a knockout, even if it might take a little bit of setup. So I do think it's a wait and see thing, but just at initial glance, looking at some of the top decks in this event, looking at what they're capable of, I don't think it's going to be like a runaway overpowered deck, but I could be wrong. It definitely has the potential to do that. You know, being able to come back and take 4 prizes with a Glutton GX is just crazy. So we'll see. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, fair enough. Al, anything to add?
No, I think it's like covered it perfectly there, really.
All right, yeah, fair enough. So then I guess moving along, we'll go right back into Zach for his top 4 pick.
All right, so my number 4 pick, we've just been talking about it. It is JL's Empoleon Macargo deck. I know Grover covered this on pretty well. Some things I'd like to add is I definitely think that I really want to emphasize how insane his item search is, especially with this particular kind of deck. He's got 3 Ultra Ball plus the Dive Ball to just be able to find everything. And the thing with this deck is once you're set up, once you have the Diving Draw and the Macargo and everything else going, you don't really need a lot of draw supporters. So I think once this deck gets going, it's going to feel a lot more like something like Zoroark GX, where rather than having to use your draw support every turn like a lot of other decks, you can just use your diving draws, use your Macargos, and then be able to focus on your very powerful tech cards, which this has a couple of them. You can add damage with the Choice Band and the Kukui, so even if your opponent's playing around Total Command, the damage output of this deck can still reach really high numbers. If you've got a full bench, your opponent only has 3 Choice Band Kukui is 210, that one shot to Soul Valley. He has the Reset Stamp Plant combo like we talked about. He also has Shrine, which if you can just stick that in play is great. And he has Lucamine to recover those things. So overall, I think this deck is very strong. If it won the event, I really wouldn't be surprised. The last thing I would say is, like the other decks, having Acerola and Scoop Up Net is really good, especially when your Pokemon are already pretty tanky. So, I mean, he can... He also has Cynthia and Caitlyn and Lucamine, so theoretically, he can pick up his Pokemon, 4 times and make your opponent take 10 knockouts. That's a really hard ask. So I think if your opponent, if he runs into people who can't one-shot him, they're going to have an insanely difficult time beating this deck. So, like I said, if it wins, I won't be surprised. All right. Next up is Al.
All right, so for my number 4 deck, I've got Zach's Blaziken Sylvally deck. I had the pleasure of playing against this earlier today, and yeah, it was definitely not what I was expecting going into the matchup. So the main thing that makes this deck so good, from playing against it at least, is the ability to repeatedly use Acerola. That was my downfall. So he's got the Fire Starter Blazikens, a bit like Malamar, attaching fire energy to your bench Pokemon. And he's got the Sylvalis. The Sylvalis are really good attackers. 3 energy 120, 2 energy 120 if you played a supporter. And they're really hard to kill in one attack. So what he does is he sends up a Selazzlejx, hits you for 120 damage. You swing back into the Selazzlejx, and then he uses Acerola, and it goes back into his hand, and then he can instantly charge it up again, evolve a different type null, play the Selazzlejx, use the fire starters, and go back into the Selazzlejx. He's got the Mind Report Mewtwo to get the Acerola back. He's got 2 Cynthia and Caitlyn's to get the Acerola back. So yeah, just a lot of ways to get the Acerola back. That was why it's so strong, I think. Blaziken Gx is a great attacker in itself. Sometimes you need to be able to take a one-shot to close out a game. He's got a really good ball search. He's got 3 nest balls, so he's going to find, even though he's only got 3 Torchic, he's going to have no problem finding them. And the disc reload Selazzlejx is really good against cards like N and Reset Stamp, which are so common in these decks in this cube. So I think it's a really strong deck. I can see him doing really well with it. So let's move on to Selazzlejx.
Yeah, so I also have Zach at my number 4 slot, and actually, with you talking about it, I think I would have ranked it higher because I didn't see that he could use Acerola 4 times in a game, and that's just wild to me. Any deck that can't take a one shot is going to have such a hard time like getting ahead. And sure, either eventually he'll miss an Acerola or he'll run out, but at that point, I think the game is going to be so far gone. Even though, even though the really best source of damage is the Blaziken Gx, aside from the Rebel GX, which is also very good, it doesn't really matter because not that many decks are just going to be able to punch through a Selazzlejx, without really considering or caring about what he's doing. They're going to have to take a 2-hit knockout. They might have to set up some chip damage, something to that effect. So the ability to loop Acerola is just insane. I just think that the deck is really strong, has a lot of really scary tricks, has some very nice consistency as well, just very well-rounded. I like the weakness guard energy as well. He recognizes that a lot of his deck is weak to the same stuff, and he definitely has the versatility. Fighting Dojo, very nice for just boosting some damage. Welder, always a great card to see in a fire deck. So just very well-rounded overall, and he has so many different tools against the spread of decks in the event that I would see it being very hard-pressed for him to take a bad matchup. Maybe some of the super powerful Empoleon decks would be not ideal, because even with the weakness guard, it could still be tough to keep up with their damage, but I'm not even sold on that. So it's a really scary deck to play against, one that I really hope I never have to play, and that is why it's my number 4, and probably on re-examination should be my number 2 or number 1 deck. But with that, I will pass it off to Mike.
All right, for my number 4 pick, I had your deck, Slate, the Lowland Egg deck. This deck's really good at being it's probably one of the most consistent decks in the event. It gets it set up real quick. It does its thing, and it's really good. It can hit 120 to 160 pretty early in the game, which is a lot of tempo and pressure. With Choice Band and double Lurantis, you can knock out some GXs. And yeah, 160 HP on a stage 1 for 1 energy is a lot of HP, and if you scoop up net it, that's very good. and once again, you have the Power Plant, Stamp, and N combo that we talked about earlier, and it doesn't really hurt you that much if you have Power Plant in play. But that can hurt a lot of decks if you Stamp Plant someone. That's good in Standard. It's good in this format. And yeah, the Ball Search is just insane in this deck with the Rescue Stretcher. And yeah, you should pretty much get a lot of attacker streamline the whole game. And this deck could fall to some Acerola one-shot plays if some decks have that, but not very many decks have that. And yeah, I think this deck's super solid, super consistent, and I could see it going pretty far. And that's my reasoning for the number 4 pick. Moving on to Grover.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm bringing a deck that we've already talked about before, and that is Blue Cheesecake's Lurantis Selazzle deck. I'm a huge fan of this deck. I really love how the Lurantis promo synergizes with not only the Lurantis GX, but also the Selazzle, giving 20 extra damage to both. I just can't stress about how cool I think that is, that it synergizes with different types, especially ones that like you wouldn't think grass and fire would have synergy like that. But nonetheless, I also just really love the tech cards he has. Like the Empoleon's really nice, and the Duo Prison Star in this deck actually makes a ton of sense because it allowed him to get into his Roast Reveal Selazzle sooner. It can be a Selazzle or a Lorantis, so it can work in either matchup. Zachary talked a lot about this deck before, but I echo all of those thoughts. He does have access to the end power plant play, which if anyone's familiar with like Drampagar back in the day, it was always a really strong combo. It still is really good against other decks, especially whenever you've used a lot of your stadiums throughout the game. But not much that I can add that hasn't already been said. I'm just a huge fan of this deck and really hope that he does well. So with that, let's recap. Going in from top 4 from left to right, we have Zach with Empoleon Macargo, we have Al with Blaziken Gx, as well as Slight with Blaziken Gx. A lot of conversation there. Mike with Lowland Eggs Garb, which is actually Slight's deck, and then of course myself with Lorantis Selazzle. We had a lot of talk about Blaziken, and is there anything anyone wants to add since that conversation's already open?
It was a very underrated deck coming in. It tested okay, didn't test amazing. A lot of people kind of wrote it off, and I think it allowed people to get some really fantastic drafts out of it. So very excited to see it do well, because I think it'll prove a lot of the naysayers wrong, and just excited to see how the deck does. Definitely hope I don't see it myself, though, because I don't think that I could beat it. But
So I did want to ask, because Zach, you were in my drafting pod. Did the pieces kind of come to you at once, or did you go in thinking you wanted to play Blaziken Gx, or how did that happen?
So really, what happened is Blaziken. It kind of fell to me as very open. I think it was pack 1. I got one pick, either 6 or 7, and then I did it again in pack 2. So at that point, I also got a welder pretty early. So it seemed like fire was pretty wide open in the pod. It definitely wasn't necessarily something I went in targeting, but I think I was able to make pretty good use of it once I realized that, okay, Blaziken's the route we want to go in this draft.
Yeah, fair enough. Anything else anyone wants to say before we move on? If not, we can move along to number 3. So Zach, go ahead and take the floor.
All right, so for number 3, I have Lewis L's Malamar spread deck. So this one, I know we've said there are quite a few of this archetype in the cube. As far as the Malamar decks go, and as far as these spread decks go, I think this one is probably my favorite one. The biggest thing I like about this is how well I think it can diversify its strategies. So where if you're going against an opponent who plays into the spread or is playing a deck who's very weak to spread, then he can focus on that. He can see the deck list in advance and be like, all right, I can go Coco, I can go Arceus, I can use Sandslash and just overwhelm them with that. But in the case that he goes up against an opponent that their deck isn't as weak to that, or, you know, that they're a good player, knows to play around it, he's got plenty of options for going the opposite path and just going the traditional Malamar. We're going to hit you hard with Necrozma for 160. We're going to hit you hard with Deoxys and Silvally. And then we're going to hit you hard with Mewtwo at the end. So that's the thing I really like about this deck is he doesn't have to go one way or another, and he can use Malamar to kind of get the best of both worlds. The other thing I really like about it is it does have the Scoop Up Block Mr. Mime. We've talked a bit about how just strong Acerola is, and the fact that he can shut that off is a huge plus for this deck. Other than that, I mean, it seems pretty consistent. I don't think he should have any real problems powering it up. And yeah, I know in chat he mentioned that it's the wrong Deoxys on the thing. He does have the Power Blast 3 for 120 Deoxys, which is why it is actually, you know, a decent attacker. But overall, I think it's a really solid, well-rounded deck. I think he has a lot of different paths to victory, and so I think if he can, you know, play it well enough, find the path in each match, he shouldn't have too much trouble just winning most of them. All right, with that, we move to Al.
All right, so I've chosen Vic's Blaziken Sandslash deck, another Sandslash deck. I think in terms of going for a spread strategy, this is the most obvious spread strategy. So he might be a bit locked into that. His opponents can play around it, but he is going to be able to perform that better than any of the other decks can, I think. He's actually got 16 supporters, 4 of them are Juniper, so he's just going to be ripping through the deck, as well as 2 Roast Reveal Selazzle, discard a fire to draw 3 cards. And that synergizes with his fire starter Blaziken, where he can start powering up his Blaziken, his Tapu Koko, and just start spreading really early into the game. He's got the Shrine of Punishment for additional spread damage. He's got the Grimsley, which I think is quite important in here. He can move 3 damage counters from one of his opponent's Pokemon to another. That could get him a critical knockout on perhaps a Dedenne or something when he goes in for the Spiky Storm to really take many prize cards in one turn. So yeah, we've spoken a lot about this Sandslash. In terms of going for spread, this I think has the best spread strategy, but it might be a bit linear. We'll have to see how well he does. And I'll pass it on to Slight.
All right. So for my number 3, I have yet another Dark Box deck. This is my favorite of the 2, or favorite of the 3 or 4. There are quite a few Dark Box decks in the event, but this one is definitely my favorite. Chimerax's Boom Dark Box that features the Electro GX. I do think Electro GX is an amazing card in this deck. I underrated it coming into the draft, and after seeing what these players have been able to do with it, I have been proven very wrong, I would say. This deck is just similar to the other one, but a little bit scarier. It has the Ace Trainer like the other one does, but it also has Acerola that it can loop with Cynthia Caitlyn. The big thing for me that sets this deck apart is the insane 4 Ultra Ball and 4 stadiums, or 3 stadiums. So the ability to counter the opponent's Disruptive Stadium is so important for this deck. And Chimerax can do it pretty reliably. Now, maybe toward the late game, if he gets end to 1, if he gets stamped low and then Stadium gets bounced, something to that effect, could still be tough, but it's going to be a lot easier to get out of than it might be otherwise. And just overall, super scary deck. I also really love the double Kukui in here, because setting up your Guzzlord GX's GX attack is probably the paramount important thing that you can do, and allowing yourself more opportunities to get a Glutton GX for 2 extra prizes is just fantastic. So this deck, super scary, and I would expect it to do very well in this event. And with that, I will pass it off to Mike.
All right, at my number 3 spot, I had Jails and Pulling on my cargo deck. I don't have too much to add on this, since we've already talked about it a lot, but the best thing about this deck is it can play very well under Power Plant, and it has a Power Plant, so that's very good. And hitting huge damage is really good. And pretty much everything else has already been talked about it, so I'll just pass it over to Crover.
All right, yeah, fair enough. So my number 3 is actually Slight's Alolan Eggs deck, which we talked about before. I like this deck for a number of reasons. For number 1, I do like that the various type coverages. You have Psychic with the Grass with the Dragon, so you have a lot. You're not just hitting with one type. So your type spread is pretty good. I'm a huge fan of that promo Laurantis, just being able to buff the Alolan Eggs attack, just being able to get bigger knockouts, reaching a lot farther. It's definitely a great thing to have. I also am a huge fan of Macargo in this cube, especially when you have cards like Oranguru. Connor basically has access to his entire deck, which can be great because as you can see, he has the reset stamp and with the power plant. I think that combo is great, especially if your opponent can't get into their counter stadium, then especially with a 1 prize attacker like this, putting on a ton of pressure, you can just lock your opponent out of the game. And then he also has Garbador as well in the back for any decks that try to go super aggressive and discard a bunch of items. He's going to be able to punish that, as well as giving him great coverage into any fighting decks he can be able to disparage with. I'm also a huge fan. He has like double Chorus with double Cynthia and the Erica, so his draw support, and the Juniper in the end also. The draw support line is like really solid in this deck. Chorus in this cube feels really great, just because everyone tends to fill their bench. You're trying to set up a lot of different attackers, support Pokemon, what have you. So having Chorus, especially 2 copies of them, to be able to just refill your hand, draw like a ton of cards up to 10, and then going smooth over Macargo into a Rangaroo basically gives him access to these crazy strategies. So I would not be surprised to see this do really well. I think Alolan Eggs has come in as kind of an underdog in a lot of testing that I've seen. So I'm excited to see more of this deck going forward. And then kind of round us out here at our top 3, we have Zach with Mally Spread, Al with Blaziken Thread, a Slight with another Dark Box, Boom Dark Box, Mike with Empoleon Macargo, and then myself with the Alolan Eggs Garbador. So something I kind of trying to noticing, a lot of these decks that we featured have had a copy of Acerola. So this is kind of open to anybody. Do we think that like maybe Acerola just elevates the quality of decks in this queue as opposed to others?
I really think, having seen a lot of matches played, I think it's probably a little bit too good. People have, especially being able to get it back once, it's really powerful. Like, you'd still put it in every single deck as a one-of if you could never use it again, but being able to use it multiple times, maybe if it was Lost Zoned or something, it would be okay, but every single deck that has Acerola in it is just so much better than any deck that doesn't. Most decks are not able to one-shot a GX, and you can take extreme advantage of that with a card like Acerola. So curious to hear if anybody else has different thoughts on it.
Yeah, it seems to be the sort of thing where, like, in this format in particular, just with how the cube has evolved, Acerola is just an incredibly powerful card. I mean, it kind of reminds me of around when it first came out. A lot of, like, the matches in Standard were just, 2-hit KOs versus 2-hit KOs with stuff like Zoroark, and then Acerola was, you're basically getting rid of one of your opponent's turns of attacks. It's kind of the same thing in this cube, where stuff like Savali, you're trading, one hit versus one hit versus one hit. But if you have an Acerola or a way to pick up, that's an extra turn, and that gives you a huge advantage. So I'll be interested to see if that ends up being the case, and the Acerola decks just do a lot better, in which case it might be something to look at.
Yeah, all very fair thoughts. Anyone else want to chime in before we move on? All right, Zach, you have the floor now for your number 2.
All right, for my number 2, I have Slight's Lowland Exeggutor Garbador deck. I know we've talked about this a little bit so far. I think the biggest thing about this deck is just how strong and aggressive it is. Lowland Exeggutor's HP is nothing to scoff at 160. I mean, if you compare that to, we've talked about Empoleon and Komo, Exeggutor has that same, tankiness, but it's a stage 1. So you can get that, and you can get that quick damage output faster than anyone else. So where I think this deck is going to be very strong is if you can just run over your opponent with it really quickly by discarding energy, and just right away your opponent has to face down a very strong, very tanky Tropical Shake. And then if they can't match it, they can get run over. But if they do, and they, try and, go through their deck to, deal with that pressure, then he has the Garbador immediately as a follow-up to punish any opponent who tries to do that. He doesn't have Acerola in this deck, but he does have Scoop Up Net, which can pick up Alolan Exeggutor, so you can't recover it, but it's almost better because you can do so at the same time as playing a supporter, which is very strong. So I think this deck is a very dangerous one, and yeah, definitely not one that I would want to see across from me. All right, Al.
All right. So I also have Slight's Alolan Exeggutor deck. We've already discussed it a lot, but I'm going to just briefly touch on why I think it's better than the other Alolan Exeggutor lists. The main reason why is the Shuckle. None of the other eggs lists managed to get the Shuckle. In case you don't know what it does, when you bench it, you can search your deck for 3 basic energy and put them in your discard pile. And that really lets him get online with the Tropical Shake a lot quicker than the other decks. I think a recurring theme for these top decks is being resilient to Power Plant Stamp or N. And this deck does that perfectly. He's got the Smooth Over Macargo, the Primate Wisdom Oranguru, so that can never really affect him because he can just smooth over, put a supporter on top, swap a card in his hand with that supporter, and he's back in the game. it's almost a perfect eggs list. The only cards I could see making it better would maybe be a Kukui. Perhaps just to reach, it's not always that easy to get both Laurentis in play. A Kukui might make that a bit more flexible, but he does have the choice band for dealing with GXs. And I think a Shrine of Punishment because also help with numbers. But apart from that, the deck it's got everything you want. And I'll pass to Smite.
Yeah, those were definitely cards that I was looking out for, for sure. The Kukui and the Shrine, but unfortunately was not able to pick them up. But my number 2 deck on the rankings is JL. So we have heard a lot of discussion about JL's deck in general. What makes me rank it a little bit higher than the other people on the list? It's just absolutely insane to me how consistent and powerful this deck can be as far as getting Mag Cargo, using Diving Draw, so you always get the cards that you need, and then Total Command Empoleon just putting out insane. Recall Empoleon can do some incredible sniping. He's got the power plant, got the Shrine of Punishment, just so many powerful options. Also the choice band, so some of those knockouts that would be difficult for Empoleon to reach, those GXs with 210, 220, they are not a problem for this deck at all because of the choice band. So many really scary things. I don't have too much else to say about it that hasn't already been mentioned. The only thing that prevents me from putting it number 1 is it's only got 2 rare candy. I would really like to see more, just given that it is an Empoleon deck. It's stage 2 deck in this cube in general, and Empoleon can really take advantage of that extra speed. Though I will say, of course, Recall Empoleon needs to evolve up, but that's such a small portion of the deck that I think that it would be just fine to see more candy. But other than that, just absolutely insane deck, and I could see it beating pretty much anything. Oh, and I will pass it off to Mike.
All right. So here I got Rex number 2 here. I think this deck's insane. First of all, it has 4 Ultra Balls. Like, this is cube. And 2 Kukui super good. And in this deck, Acerola is especially good because of you can move off the energy. So Acerola literally has no downside other than just your supporter for the turn. And this deck is just so insane. So later in the game, he'll pretty much always be behind, but he can counter catcher a less than 100 HP Pokemon and Guzzler GX for game. Just take 3 prizes. That's just super good. And it kind of plays like ADP where you're super slow to start off with, but then you just start taking big multi-prize turns with GX attacks and Sledgehammer Buzzwole you can force really early if you pop that Trode turn 2, you can just Sledgehammer. And this deck once it gets going, can hit everything super hard, take multiple just huge prize turns. You can take 4 prizes in turn if it needs to. And this deck's super scary to go against, and I would not want to play against it ever. All right, moving on to Grover.
Yeah, so I actually have the same deck in my number 2 pick. I'm a huge fan of this. It wasn't actually until right before recording the podcast episode that Connor really sold me on the Electro GX with this deck in particular, just because he is able to synergize with cards like Sledgehammer, with cards like Ace Trainer, and that Electro GX is kind of scary, which is funny because it was so underplayed and maybe just kind of terrible in Standard whenever it was time. But then in Cube, it's a completely different ball game. You're dealing with a lot of different decks, and there's a lot more you can pair with it. So I would be a huge fan of seeing the Electro GX in the finals or in the top 8. In general, this Dark Box deck is really interesting. I think Guzzler GX is one of the scariest cards I have seen in this cube, and especially in playing some of the test cubes that we've done in the past. That Guzzler with the Glutton GX being able to take up to 3 prizes, if not more, can be scary, and he has an engine to set it up. So that's a lot to deal with, and 210 HP on a basic is nothing to scoff at either. So I won't go on much longer. We've talked about this deck a lot. It's definitely one I'm looking forward to seeing. So just kind of to recap what we've already talked about, on our number 2 slot, starting with Zach, we have a Lowland Eggs, and as well with Al, we have a Lowland Eggs. Slight with the Empoleon Macargo, and Mike and myself with the Dark Box with the Electrode. So seeing a little bit of similarities here with Zach and Al having the same pick, as well as Mike and myself having the same pick. We have talked about Lowland Eggs a lot, especially going from mine to Zach to Al. Connor, how did you get into this deck that you've built? Was this again a deck you were thinking about playing, or did you just find the pieces, or did you feel like Lowland Eggs would turn out to be this way?
So I was thinking about the matchup spreads for each of the decks in the event, and I thought this was beforehand, and I thought that Alolan Exeggutor just had a really nasty matchup spread, being able to take advantage of cards like Power Plant, like Shrine of Punishment, really well. I actually wanted like 4 of them. That didn't happen. Those cards ended up being really, really high priority picks in my draft, but just being able to take advantage of the Lurantis or the Altaria to buff up to 160 meant you could trade really well with the Stage 2 decks, and having such high HP meant that you could trade really well with the GX-based decks. So I just really identified it as a deck that I would like to be on during the event. I actually started off on something totally different. In my first couple of picks, I took like a Welder and a Reshiram GX, so I was pretty ready to be on fire. But then midway through, probably pick 7 or 8, in the first couple of packs, I think it might have been pack 1, I saw the Shuckle. And it was late enough that I thought that if anybody was on Alolan Exeggutor, or even if anyone was planning to be on Alolan Exeggutor, then they would have already picked up that Shuckle, because it's such a powerful card in the deck. So as soon as I saw that, I took it, and I kind of invested both in strong fire cards that I saw and in Exeggutors, but as soon as I saw the first Exeggutor, it was probably pick 4, 5, 6, not even a super early pick, into the second or third pack. I knew at that point that it was almost certainly open, and I moved on to it from there. So that was kind of how I went. It wasn't necessarily a deck that I was forcing, but it was a deck that I was really alert toward, because I thought that its matchup spread was just really great.
Yeah, fair enough. So, anything else to add from anybody on any of the decks you've mentioned, or anything on Alolan Eggs before we move on?
I'd like to talk about the Garbador partner.
Yeah,
I
go
think
for
that's a really smart move. So like Slight was saying, you can use Lurantis or Altaria. That lets you hit the 160, which one-shots every stage 2 in the cube, apart from a Machamp. I think it's a Sword and Shield Machamp, which has 170. So I think the Garbodor, not only is it good against the Machamp, it gives you a fighting chance if you do go against that matchup. It's just a really efficient attacker later in the game. Perhaps if you don't manage to find, I don't know, the 4th or 5th egg you're attacking with in that game. So shout out to the Garbodor, basically.
I drafted a full 2/2 Garbodor. I ended up only playing 2/1 because in testing it was pretty unreliable as far as how strong it was. But in the games where it was strong, it was just devastating. And Garbodor to me kind of played to the same strengths that Alolan Egg played to, being a powerful stage 1. They can attack with very few energy. Just kind of continuously force your opponent to play in ways that are suboptimal. Don't want to play a lot of items because you can't play into Garb. Can't really rely on GXs very well, or have to play careful with stadiums because you can get power planted. Have to worry about like getting knocked out with Lurantis and Choice Band and all that with GXs. So the more I could push my opponents into kind of a pigeonhole of how they have to play the game and make them do it in a way that's uncomfortable or just not ideal for their deck, that was all kind of came together in the tools that I decided to put into the deck. So I really like Garb as the partner. And I think it's a neat card in this cube. It's not too powerful, but it does definitely have a lot of use.
Yeah, well said, everybody. So, without further ado, we're going to go into our number 1 pick, starting with Zach. You got the floor.
All right, so for pick number 1, I have Chimera X's Boom Dark Box Weavile Electrode GX deck. I know everyone, I think, has ranked this deck so far, and so we've talked about it a bit, but I think it's almost underselling how utterly broken this deck is. I have a feeling after this cube, Guzzlord is probably going to be taken out of this of it, just because it's kind of an absurd thing to be able to do. But really, what stands out to me about this deck is how strong the combos are, and how just overwhelming an early game I feel this deck can have. The Electro GX, he's got tons of pieces to work well with it. One thing I saw him do in one of his games is early, you can blow it up to immediately put your opponent at 4 prizes, and then Sledgehammer is active, so you can just be going turn 2 Sledgehammer, and your opponent has to deal with that. If they don't knock it out, then you just keep doing that. He has a ton of ways, even without the Electrode, to accelerate energy, because he has Yveltal to, Oblivion Wing. He has Dark Darkrai Prism Star to attach to, and then he can use Scoop Up Net on the Darkrai Prism Star to attach to, and then Acerola the Darkrai Prism Star to attach to. So early game, like, you could be dealing with that Guzzlord very quickly, even just, and if you can't deal with that, which most decks are going to struggle with, then it's going to be, overwhelming to start. And then you have to deal with the Electrode problem when the Ace Trainer and the Counter Catcher and everything he can do with that. So really, I don't think that unless this hits a bad matchup that it is going to lose. And even then, he has weakness policy to deal with fighting. He can just, stop the Murley with Ace Trainer, stop their setup to run over him. He can, buy some turns putting them to sleep with Darkrai, and then if Darkrai's not knocked out, Scoop Up Net it back. So I think this deck is terrifyingly good, and that is why it is my number one pick. Al.
All right, so I have JL's Empoleon Makago at number 1. It's got the Makago Oranguru engine, as well as the diving draw. So there's no way he can get stamped or end out of the game, which is really strong. The reason why I rank this as number 1 is the power of the Acerola looping again. He's got the Acerola, he's got the Cynthia and Caitlyn, and the Lusamine, as well as the Scoop Up Net. And the Empoleons have really efficient attack costs, only requiring 1 or 2 energy for the total command. He's got the Kukui and the Choice Band. And he has the power to find those whenever he needs them because of the Makago. So he can smooth over for Kukui. He's got that extra 20 damage he needs just to reach. We've talked about this deck a lot. I really like it. The only thing I would say to improve it would maybe be some item-based Pokemon recovery. Relying on the Brock's Grit isn't always ideal. But apart from that, it's really good. And I'll pass it to Slight.
All right, my number 1 deck is one that we have actually not talked about a ton. 2 people have rated it, but my number 1 deck is Blue Cheesecake's Lurantis Selazzle deck. It's just I've been thinking of it in my head as the P3 podcast or PQ podcast deck, just because Andrew and I talked about it so much on the episode of the podcast where we were talking about this cube. But I still think this deck is amazing. It has so much aggressive potential between the Selazzle and the Lurantis GX, and being buffed by the Lurantis promo. Really, really nice draw power with the Roast Reveal Selazzle 2 of Ditto Prism Star, also an excellent card in this deck. You're playing a bunch of different stage 2s, being able to turn into pretty much anything that you could need is super helpful. I also love the Entei. A lot of the time, you are going to be attacking with GXs pretty much all game, so using the Entei can set your opponent to where they might have to take 7 prizes, which is really nice. It also just deals 160 damage for 2 energy on a basic after a knockout. So insanely, insanely powerful attacker. And that's, of course, with 2 Lurantis in play. But it also has the Welder, which makes it even more aggressive. It has Acerola, which we talked about being so strong. Solid Search Backbone as well. 2 Communication, 2 Cherish Ball, Nest Ball, Net Ball, Ultra Ball. So just really nice search. He's pretty much going to get off to a super strong start every single game. And it even has the Power Plant as well with the N, 2 of N actually. And it's really easy for Blue Cheesecake to get out of the N because of the Selazzle. So many things in this deck that are just extremely powerful, and I would not be surprised to see it do extremely well or win the event. And I keep forgetting to pass to Mike. Go ahead.
All right. So I had Blaziken Sylvally Acerola as my number 1 pick here. The biggest thing about this deck is it can loop Acerola, and that's like the biggest reason I have a number 1. Just being able to loop Acerola is just nuts in this cube. With the Mewtwo, the Double Scented Caitlyn, the Power Pad. Like, if you can loop like a powerful healing card, that's just a win con against a lot of decks. And like, I definitely think that was an oversight in making the cube Acerola not being lost zone. I think we probably should have did that, but it's legal here and it's super good. his attackers are really good at taking 2 shots and about everything. They're super consistent. And yeah, this deck will consistently heal pretty much every game unless like Acerola is prize, and even if it's prize, it's still a super good deck. He has I really like Reset Stamp and N just in general, as they're just good cards, and I think this deck is super good, and I could see like as long as it's not getting one shot by anything, like the big attackers. Like if a deck's hitting 220, I think that's the biggest problem with this deck. But other than that, I think that it's a really good deck, and I could see it going really far, winning the event. And yeah, that's why I had it at number 1. All right, I'll pass it over to Grover.
All right, so Mike and I actually have the same pick. I also have Z Kreckler's Blaziken Selazzlejx deck as number 1 for the reasons mentioned. The Mind Report Mewtwo into Acerola combo just seems really strong, and the fact that he's able to take off big attackers like Blaziken Gx or even the little Blazikens, just really strong in general. I love the fact that he also has a copy of the Sledgehammer Buzzwole, which seems to be really strong, probably really strong against a lot of the Dark Box decks that we've also mentioned. So it's got a lot of like good type coverage here. But yeah, the Acerola is just really strong, and that's something that maybe it is kind of hard to see because just some behind the scenes stuff. I mean, as we draft these cubes as test drafts throughout in the Cube League and the Cube Discord prior to these tournaments, and this cube's undergone a lot of progress in that. So it's just kind of just how the meta evolves, and cards like this are pretty easy to slip under. But you know, it doesn't mean it's the end all be all. I definitely think people with on the understanding that maybe the Acerola is part of the strategy. You can play into that with the perfect knowledge of having access to deck lists. So it definitely adds a lot of power to these decks to be able to deny prizes. But hopefully players now with the information given will be able to play around it to the best of their abilities. But that is not to say that Acerola is really strong. But also just being able to recycle it with cards like Cynthia, Caitlyn, and Mewtwo, I think pairs well with this very streamlined attacking deck. So where that leaves us now, as far as everyone's picks from number 1 going over, we have Zach with Dark Box, Bismillah with Empoleon Macargo, Slate with Lorantis Selazzlejx, and Mike and myself with Blaziken Selazzlejx. Zach, I just have to ask, did you expect your deck to be ranked so high, or what were your feelings going into this?
I mean, I'm glad people see, are thinking it's a good deck. I mean, I also do think it's a really good deck. I mean, being able to use Acerola 5 times is ridiculous. And I think one thing I do want to say about this is it does actually have a decent amount of one-hit KO potential with the Blaziken GX and then the Selazzlejx's 2 GX attacks. So it's not that it only has to play a 2-hit KO game too, which is, especially when you add Dojo into the mix. That's one of the things I was able to do in my game against Al was being behind Dojo plus Selazzlejx one-shots Como, or can one-shot anything at 160 HP, which can be very strong. But no, I mean, I think it's pretty solid. I think it came together well. It's another thing that just, it has some really good combos in it. And like we said, Acerola is really good if you can't get one shot.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Just some more tidbits about this cube, just because some people might not be aware. It is all pretty much Sun and Moon based. I don't know if any of the events could answer this for you, but like, when was this deck slated for Cube League, or was there a process for getting this in the mix?
Yeah, so we've been talking about this for I don't know, at least like 4 months, right? Does anyone remember when we first tested this?
I know we did the initial test quite a while ago.
I think
And
it
it was because it would have been before the last Champions Cube, at least. So it has been a few months that it's been, on the radar.
I feel like it was like October, or like the month after that. Like October.
Yeah, it's been a long time that we've kind of been testing this. I think right after the first test, it was immediately identified as a cube that had a lot of potential for the league, but everyone pretty much agreed that it needed work before we were able to run it. And it has come a long way since then. A lot of changes have been made, and I think that it's in a much better place as far as balance. If the card that we're talking about being too powerful is Acerola, as opposed to some attacker that just kills everything, then I think that that's definitely good. One deck has the ability to use Acerola like multiple times, maybe beyond 2. So I think overall it's in a really good spot as far as balance right now. But it was definitely a process. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of let's try this, let's try this, let's try this, and it finally got here. So even if your cube is not the most balanced on the first run, definitely don't be discouraged. I would say to continue talking with us and testing it and seeing if it can be shaped into something that we might run for the league. So, but yeah, it was definitely a process. What was you guys' perspective on that? I know pretty much everyone tested this at least once. I think Mike, you said you tested it like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this one was definitely one of the ones that underwent the most like rigorous testing running up. Like we even had like a last test on Wednesday, so it was like test after test after test, just refining, and I think the end result is really good. I think this cube it seems, at least to me, to be one of the more popular ones that we've run, and it's definitely been a lot of fun to play in. So yeah, like you said, I think even if you have a cube and it's first run maybe is a little rough, it can just keep refining it, keep working at it, and it can turn into something very.
Oh, I think you might have cut out there.
Yeah, I think we lost him. Yeah.
Oh, I think I hear him.
I think you're back.
Back now.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
Yeah. When did I cut out at?
The word very.
Very. I don't remember what I was saying. I just know that it was good.
TLDR, the cube is good.
Yeah, the cube is good. You got that nice insight.
Yeah, this like power of cube has been like really undiscovered between like at least this Discord group. Like it's been pretty underdiscovered. So like it's all new lines, a lot of balancing to go through it. There's a lot of like, yeah, this is like just super underdiscovered, and now we figured out the format and like what's good, what's not good, and it's a lot more balanced now.
Yeah, I think this is definitely. I think you're absolutely right. Especially when it comes to more of these like higher power or like this sort of block style in terms of using GXs we don't commonly see. Which I was actually hoping someone would go this route because especially now that we've finished out the Sun and Moon era, we have a full fleshed meta that we can work with. There's cards. Shout out to Vent. This is his cube. It definitely takes a lot of work to keep up with a cube like this, and he's been really good at making changes and being very receptive. So obviously the admins work really closely with the cube builder, and they don't force the hand. I mean, like this is all like a collaborative process, but Vent's been very receptive and very fun to work with. I think I echo the same thoughts. I think a lot of this what's going on, there's like a lot of really cool takes on the Sun and Moon era, and these aren't necessarily decks. I mean, these obviously aren't decks you would find built when Standard was a thing, because Cube just offers a very different deck building style because you're drafting. So and especially as any draft formats would go, this is certainly a unique experience, and we're looking forward to bringing out more of that and hopefully showing off more of the games. If you saw last time, we were able to show the finals. We're hoping to show maybe more of the top 8 this go around. But yeah, I definitely feel like this is a strong contender. If anyone in chat has any questions or any feedback they'd like to give about the cube or anything they want to ask, we'll definitely open the floor to you guys too if you want to ask. If not, we're getting the final numbers ready to show, but we'll be with those in a second. Any other thoughts? Oh, what was that? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I'm almost finished on the aggregates actually, and I have to say the difference between rank 4 aggregate and the difference and rank 1 is 0.5.
Wow.
So rank 4 is an average ranking of 3. Rank 3 is an average ranking of 2.75. Rank 2 is an average of 2.6, and rank 1 is a rating of 2.5. So super close on the aggregate, which we don't always see. All right, so I have got our aggregate rating. We'll send it over to you guys.
All right, we'll get that up in just a second. I would like to give a few shout outs. Number one, shout out to David Sosa for doing all of the visuals that you see. He unfortunately couldn't make it to this. He was originally slated to step in and commentate, but he had other things he had to do. So, but we appreciate that he took the time and made all of this these graphics for us. He's very talented.
He's actually He's running the cube in the Discord right now.
That's great.
That's yeah.
Man.
So and I'll be working hard, making sure
shout out
that
to
things
Dobby.
continue to run.
He's the real MVP. And then also shout out to Best Pal. Also, thank you for stepping in at the last second.
It's all right. Thanks for having me.
Hope you had fun. And like I said, shout out to Ben. This is his cube. This is definitely a monster cube to have to balance, but luckily it's not done alone. And I do agree, it's come a long way, and especially in the time they've had to test it. So can't be mad about that. We'll have that up in just a second. Anyone else has any last minute things they would like to add?
I know someone mentioned in chat that Vent's deck list is sick too. I do want to just agree with that. I'm surprised it's not actually in anyone's rankings, because he can also use Acerola. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 times. He got three. He can use Acerola 3 times, and he has Scoop Up Net, and B String. So his Dark Box Selazzlejx deck is really sweet.
I feel like
I'm glad you pointed that out.
he has to be in everyone's like top 8.
Oh yeah,
Like he has to
Sure.
be.
Yeah, for sure.
I
If
also
it
wanted
was a top 8, it'd be pretty high.
I also wanted to point out that like we got to see Vent draft that deck, which is really cool. Especially on the stream. If you haven't seen it, there's the VOD of it on our YouTube channel at P3 Podcast. But it's always really cool watching people it's cool to see them build the decks, but I think it also adds another layer to see how they get into those decks. I just wanted to throw that out there that if you wanted to watch that, feel free to check it out.
Yeah, definitely. I just think that draft was really interesting to watch. So should be nice for anybody who's interested.
Yeah. So now that we have those numbers, we're gonna transition into. We have at number 1 we have Z Kreckler, number 2 Chimerex, number 3 Slight, number 4 JL, and 5 Blue Cheesecake. So is anyone surprised by any of these? I mean, this is kind of where I expected things to land, at least as far as Chimerex and Zach being somewhere close to the top. And then, of course, a lot of these were on mine with Slight and JL and Blue Cheesecake. Any thoughts on these?
I have a hard time disagreeing personally because 4 of these 5 were on my top 5, and the one that wasn't is me. So pretty happy with how the aggregate turned out on this one as far as predictions. I did think that this time around the top decks, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, but the top decks are like really strong. So interested. What did you guys think of how the aggregate fell?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of the same way here. The rankings are 4 decks that I had and me, who I can't rank. So, I mean, I think these top ones are definitely very strong. It's interesting because I feel like the average deck in this cube is pretty well built. Like, they're really, when we were doing this, like, even months ago, you'd always have a few that like were really lacking in some consistency piece or something like that. I don't think that really happened this time around. I think most of these decks are, pretty solid. And then somehow the very top tier ones just take it to another level. So I'll be interested to see if that actually does end up being the case and these decks are as good as we think they are, or if, the gap isn't all that large.
Yeah, it's interesting because the decks that are like 35 to 10 or so, those are decks that in past leagues, if we go back 3 months or 4 months, then they are decks that could be in the top 8 or top, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people have gotten so much better and the whole group has kind of elevated, and now you see these exceptional decks kind of breaking away. So I wonder if it's possible in Cube in general for everybody to come away with an exceptional deck. I don't necessarily think it is, just because there's a limited pool of super powerful cards.
Mm-hmm.
But really interested to see that just kind of the average has shifted up. You could have gotten, if there was like an ELO rating or something in the Cube Discord, then you could be at the same rating you were 3-4 months ago, but you could be much better at Cube now than you were then. So I think that's always a really interesting trend to see whenever it happens. Also, one thing I wanted to mention is that I think every single deck, even among the super top tier decks, has bad matchups against some other decks. There was no deck that I looked at and I was like, yeah, this will just beat anything that it sits across from. Even among the top 5, like Blue Cheesecake might struggle against Jails and Polion deck. Zach, you might struggle against Jails and Polion deck. I am going to have a rough time with like the Blaziken deck, or I don't know. I was looking at the top decks and I was really just not excited to play against any of them. So probably most of the top decks I would lose to. But just even these top 5 decks, and these are like the best decks, at least the ones that we consider the best in the event, have decks that they are going to have a really hard time beating. So I think that is really interesting and also very good. I don't know, a deck that just beats everything without consideration isn't fair necessarily to me. So I'm just excited to see that, and I think it's really interesting to point out.
No, definitely a good point. And I like what you said too, that like the the idea that if everyone could have like everyone is getting better at cubing, so like the deck lists that we see over time are improving too. I think that's one of my favorite aspects about this cube league, and like that it keeps happening each month, is that you actually see the progression of players from month to month, especially in their deck building prowess. And I hope that we continue to see that, and hopefully we see even newer players in the rankings each time. But enough on my side. Any last minute thoughts that anyone wants to add or comment on?
Thanks for playing, everybody who played and signed up this time. Biggest cube league yet. Really excited to see that. Please continue to sign up. Hopefully you have a good time this time. And I don't know, the league has just been growing really nicely. So thank you to everyone who is playing, and hope to see you again.
Yep, and if you are wondering how to get in on the next Cube League, exclamation point Discord will take you to our Cube Discord that is free to enter, free for anyone to join. Even if you don't plan on playing, there's a lot of just Cube information there. It's like old lists, a lot of discussion on Cube. Connor, when do we expect the next Cube League to take place?
We're in round 2 right now. We will have 4, 5, 6, 7 more matches. 35 days of matches, so that'll be late April if I had to shoot. Let's see. No, it would be early May. Yeah,
Early
the next
May.
Cube League will fire in early May.
Okay, yeah, so if anyone's listening to this and didn't get a chance to participate in this one, but really wants to, again, check out the Cube Discord. In early May will be the next Cube League starts. But there are tons of drafts happening between that. Every weekend there is tons of cubes being fired, like maybe 3 to 4 to 5 happening over the weekend. So are all free to enter, and they all take place the same day. So if you really want a cube in general, I encourage you to check it out. Thank you to everybody for coming out and checking out the live power rankings. Definitely different. Of course, I'm new to this as well, so again, guys, I appreciate you letting me participate as well in this power rankings. It's been a lot of fun. And yeah, so again, thank you to everybody. If you want to watch the VOD of this, it'll hopefully be on YouTube tomorrow. If not, you can check out the Twitch channel for the full VOD. But we will see you guys later, hopefully with more of a top 8 this time around for the Cube League. But yep, see you guys next time.